everyone. We're the good doctors of Abbey Research. I am Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
I noticed, by the way, that we both always move our heads when we say our names. I wonder why we do that. That's fascinating.
It is true. I just noticed this. I'm Dr. Erin.
Besides being bobbleheads, we are also PhDs with social science degrees who are fascinated, i.e. obsessed, with talking about culture, both popped and lived, because we really are convinced that talking about culture, talking about art produced as culture, talking about how people live together is a way forward out of the fractional society we live in now and into a more cohesive one, is to understand each other a little bit better through these methods. And so we have conversations on this channel, wherever you're listening to us, everything from today's conversation about a documentary made about a beauty pageant, to conversations about body size discrepancies in Bridgerton, to a review of Alex Gibney's conversation about opioids. We're all over the show because so are humans. We have these conversations with ourselves all the time. You should see the WhatsApps. Then we turn on the camera and the microphone for y'all because we love to hear your thoughts and feelings about the things we care about. And also, if there's ways that we can serve you better as you examine your own ideas of culture towards a more cohesive society.
This video is a part of our Colonizers World Tour, where each week for the rest of 2021, we will be stopping at parts around the world, examining a different culture and how their history and contemporary culture has been shaped by colonialism. We've been working our way towards this without really knowing it for the better part of the last year, and that crystallized at the start of this year into, what we should really talk about some more is the impact of colonialism and the lens through which we can understand these different cultures and that engagement. So we are in the Pacific Island region of the world this month for Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We are up to our third stop on this part of the tour. Second stop, sorry, was going ahead in my head. We are on the second stop in Fiji, which we did our 101 Fiji video, which dropped yesterday. And today, the piece of art that we found is a delightful documentary called Myths South Pacific, Beauty and the Sea, which was a early 2010s documentary about the 2009 Myths South Pacific beauty pageant, or cultural pageant. I mean, it is women and they are beautiful, but it's a whole lot more a celebration of the varying cultures of the South Pacific than it is about objectifying women's bodies, which was really, really rad. So it journeys this, it details this journey specifically for that competition was housed in Fiji that year, which is why we selected it as part of our Fiji content. And it focuses a lot on what's going on in Fiji and highlights most Miss Fiji, who, spoiler alert, ends up winning the competition that year. It was almost 20 years ago, so you'll take the spoiler.
Just 10.
Just 10 years ago. But still, it's quite a long spoiler. Dr. Kristen, what do you want to talk about that we learned from Miss South Pacific?
First of all, that climate change is a real big deal and has been a real big deal to people who are not me for a really long time.
The whole theme was the way that the climate has impacted the Pacific Islands, and that's what the women had to speak to and recognize in every part of the competition. It was fascinating.
Yeah, I remember Earth Day and stuff when I was little, but it never connected to my life because of the postcode privilege I enjoy. So seeing the small ways that it did and how they talked about it, and I am not from a culture that has a deep relationship with land, and I am always fascinated by cultures that do, and how they talk about their land as a member of their family in a way, and that kind of stuff. So I really loved that. I also loved learning that a sarong competition, which is their version of the bikini competition, had to represent their culture and their culture's modesty standards in a really unapologetic way. You have to, I rewound that segment and rewatched it to look at the different ways that the women tied their sarongs, the different ways, because bathing suits for people who live on the island are not a vacation wardrobe, they're functional.
Yeah.
you live in and out of the sea all the time. And so this has to be part of how they see the world, is how they interact with the water as much as how they interact with the land.
Yeah, that was fascinating that like one of the stipulations from the committee was that the sarongs had to be functional and they had to prove that they could like withstand swimming for a certain amount of time. We learned a lot about the impact of climate change on the Pacific Islands, which is the lowest in terms of carbon producing, climate damaging chemicals, but the highest in terms of the impact because of where it is in the Pacific Ocean, that they're mostly island nations with very low sea level. So a lot of the islands are disappearing. And we learned about, I didn't double check to see what happened to them, but in this 2009, they were talking about the disappearance of Vanuatu, which is one of the Pacific Island nations, is literally just going to disappear as the sea levels rise. And so I loved that aspect of it and that focus, and that the women were so passionate about their cultures and also the impact of climate change on their culture and this idea of their land as their most precious resource, which is a very common perspective in many indigenous cultures around the world, not white Christian European ones, but it's certainly very true for a lot of indigenous peoples in the United States and Canada, and all over the world. So, you know, that was not surprising to me, but I learned a lot. I also learned a lot about the different cultures. We get a lot of focus on Miss Fiji, but we also learn about you know, Samoa and Vanuatu and Papua New Guinea and all these other places, because their culture had to be part of their attire as well. And so the fancy dress portion, the like ball gown portion, it had to be made from natural, only natural materials, no synthetic materials, no glitter, no plastics. And it had to be represent their culture as well. And hearing the women talk about how they designed their outfits and what it meant to them and what that message was, it was such a cool thing. And I don't even think we can call it like a beauty pageant, because it wasn't.
No, it's a cultural celebration with scholarship money, maybe.
I don't know. But y'all, it was so cool. And it was really a great lens to learn about those islands and the work that the women do in a way that wasn't super depressing, especially if you watched our 101 video on Fiji. It's not a great life for women in a lot of ways by a lot of metrics. But it was great to get this perspective and to remind us that cultures are complicated. And, you know, these women might have had some terrible experiences because they're women in Pacific Island nations, but they also loved where they came from and they loved their culture and they were very proud of it. So it was a cool reminder to get that poke that like, it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah. And that's an important part about learning about culture. Even when we hold the trauma, we have to remember that joy comes in the morning, and that's a huge part of the human experience as well. Yep. And it doesn't negate anything, but it is present at all times. We loved talking about this. I will say one of my favorite things about this whole project has been finding all of these kind of random documentaries that if I hadn't Googled obsessively, I probably wouldn't have found.
This is a special, Dr. Kristen has many special talents.
Finding a seat at any bar.
Finding a seat at any bar is one of the most useful ones outside of the work we do for Abby Research. She's so good at it, y'all, but she is exceptionally good at Google searching. Like, I think I find things and then I'm like, look what I found. And she's like, look at the 15 things I found that are better. And I'm like, how did you do that? She understands the Google so good. And she's just in charge of finding the art we cover for this Colonizers World Tour. I'll find all the depressing documentaries by UN women, but she gets to find the joy. Well, not always joy if you watched our coverage of Yemen. But
all that to say, I am sure I missed something. So if you know something we should be watching, we are also very careful not to try to find art that is told by the people from there. Yeah. So like a lot of stuff was filmed in Fiji and in Indonesia and in Bali and in all the places in this part of the world that are like Western stories, I've probably seen those. I have South Pacific memorized. Like, we're good on that front. What we're looking for is stuff that is made by people who call that place home.
Yeah.
And that is proving more challenging, but we're grateful for, as evil as Amazon is, just gonna throw that out there. The fact that on some level they can provide a server that lets me watch this thing is a fun part of living in 2021.
Yeah, for sure. So that is our time on our stop in Fiji. Next up, we will be traveling to Papua New Guinea. And boy, did we learn some interesting things about Papua New Guinea that we will be talking about with y'all next week.
See you then.